Hello, fight fans, and welcome to another edition of Monday Night Fight Talk. As always, I am your host, Dylan Brewski, and we have a very action-packed show for you today. Starting off, I will be talking about Bellator 283, and I actually attended that live, so that was a whole new experience for me. This was my first live MMA event ever, so that was very exciting. Also, I'll be reacting to UFC Fight Night, Blaydes versus Aspinall, which for the second straight week, we had another UFC event end due to injury, unfortunately. So I'll be talking about that. Plus, I give my predictions for all the fights coming up this next Saturday at UFC 277, headlined with two title fights, the interim flyweight title between Brandon Moreno and Kai Kara France, and the women's bantamweight title rematch between Juliana Pena and Amanda Nunes. But let's start off with Bellator 283. Like I said, I attended it live. It was such a fun, unbelievable experience. I got the chance to even meet Terrence McKinney, the UFC fighter, in the lobby before we got to our seats, so that was really cool. He was a very genuine, cool guy. Got a picture with him. You can see that on my Instagram and Twitter if you would like to take a look at that picture. So it was overall fun card to watch too. I mean, we had some great knockouts including Roman Faraldo over Luis Ignias, Dalton Costa with a crazy Superman punch leading to a left hook knockout over Romero Cotton, and in the co-main event, Tofik Musayev over the number one contender. In Musayev's Bellator debut, he got a 30-second, 1 minute knockout over the number one contender in the lightweight division, Sydney Outlaw, who was originally scheduled to fight the lightweight champion Patricio Pitbull, but unfortunately Pitbull did have to pull out due to injury. But huge win for Tofik Musayev in that one. There was some controversy in the Outlaw stoppage, though. Outlaw definitely didn't think it should have been stopped. I think it was an okay stoppage. He looked pretty out cold on his way to the ground after one of the strikes, so I thought it was a decent stoppage by Keith Peterson. But nonetheless, Outlaw didn't like it. I'm sure they'll meet again in the future. But also there were some great submission wins by Ahmed Magomedov over Kevin Boehm, Vida Ortega versus over Vanessa Porto, Usman Nurmagomedov, Khabib's little cousin, so Khabib was in the house too. That was pretty cool to see him. But Usman got the win over Chris Gonzalez, and last but not least, Marcelo Golm with a absolutely crazy comeback win over Davion Franklin. Davion Franklin in the first round had Marcelo Golm over his head twice and slammed him to the ground both times. That was a crazy fight. But with 30 seconds left, after Golm probably lost all three of the rounds, Marcelo Golm sinks in a triangle choke with 30 seconds left to get the win. And I actually had a friend with me, Jake, who actually bet on Marcelo Golm, who was a huge underdog in that fight, and it wasn't looking good for him, and then the last 30 seconds he did win some money, so that was cool for him. And then it was all wrapped up with the main event, Jason Jackson with an absolute dominant decision victory over Douglas Lima. A lot of people didn't like this fight. There was a lot of boos. There was somebody right behind me just yelling boring the whole fight. That was pretty annoying. So, I mean, honestly, if you're going to an MMA fight night, you can't expect there not to be grappling. I know Jason Jackson's fight wasn't the most exciting, but he had a game plan and he perfectly executed it. Douglas Lima looked like he just accepted every position that he was put in. So I think if you're going to boo anybody, you should boo Douglas Lima for not even attempting to get up to better his position whatsoever. Jason Jackson absolutely dominated this fight, and he got the win out of it. So I don't like that they started to boo him necessarily. But overall, Bellator was such a cool experience. I got a shirt. I got a Fedor bobblehead. So that was pretty cool. I was very excited about that. So overall, a very great, positive experience at my first ever MMA event. But that is enough about Bellator. Let's get into UFC Fight Night. Blaydes versus Aspinall, the second UFC London card of the year. UFC London the first time was one of the best cards so far this year. This it definitely didn't live up to the first one, but there was some good fights on this card. I'm not going to sit here and say that it was boring, but you didn't get a lot of the finishes that you saw in the first card. It was a lot more decision victories in this one. Starting off with the first fight, Claudio Silva versus Nicolas Dalby. A very good fight to start off the day between these two guys. Claudio Silva came out looking fantastic, got a takedown, controlled the entire first round basically, got an easy first round win. But then things took a turn. It seemed like after that first round, Claudio Silva was already just absolutely gassed. He had nothing left in the tank to show for the second and third round, and Nicolas Dalby took full advantage. Nicolas Dalby's cardio is insane. They were talking about it because in the middle of the first round, Dalby sounded like he was dying. He was breathing insanely hard. But it sounds like he does that to like control his breathing, and it helps him with his cardio. So it seemed to work because he was great in the second and third round. It ended up getting him a decision victory, taking the second and third rounds by pretty dominant fashion, in fact. So big comeback victory for Nicolas Dalby. That landed us with Mandy versus Victoria Leonardo. An absolutely tremendous performance by Victoria Leonardo. She definitely didn't dominate this fight, but she controlled where it went and when it went there. She controlled the range because Mandy had a huge size advantage. She was quite a bit taller than Leonardo, but she kept it in close. She kept going to the clinch, attempting takedowns. She landed a couple of those takedowns. She just seemed to have a great game plan against the taller fighter and was able to keep it in her range instead of going into Mandy Bohm's range, and ended up getting her the decision victory, a very clear decision victory. Again, not entirely dominant, but she clearly won the fight, and that led to Jai Herbert versus Kyle Nelson, another fight where it seemed like one fighter really controlled where the fight went the entire time. It was just Jai Herbert. You could see the influence in Leon Edwards on Jai Herbert as they are training partners. They do fight very similar. I'm sure Jai Herbert has picked up a ton of knowledge from Leon Edwards. As we know, Leon Edwards is a fantastic fighter. He's fighting for the welterweight championship here in a few weeks. So it was not the most exciting fight, but hey, Jai Herbert did what he needed to do to get the win, coming off of a loss against Ilia Topuria, where he got knocked out cold in his home country. So this was a big win in terms of confidence, a morale boost for Jai Herbert. And then we had Muhammad Makayev versus Charles Johnson. This was a really weird fight, as Makayev really controlled most of the fight with his grappling, getting a flyweight record 12 takedowns in this fight. But also, you got to give some props to Charles Johnson. He never accepted any position he was put in. He would get back up every single time. It was very impressive to see him he would get taken down and then almost immediately get back up. There was really no point where Makayev had just a dominant run where he was controlling the fight on the ground for a long time. But at the end of the day, he controlled the fight in the clinch for the most part. He did the most damage. He attempted the submissions. So he got the easy decision victory in this one. then that transitions us to finally, in the fifth fight, we finally got a finish. Macwana Mirakani versus Jonathan Pierce. Very fun fight to watch. Both guys were fairly even when it came to the grappling, with Mirakani landing 3 takedowns. Jonathan Pierce had 4 takedowns, but the big discrepancy was in the striking department. Mirakani landed 12 total strikes. Jonathan Pierce landed 144. Pierce just had the constant pressure that it seemed Mirakani could not keep up with, which I thought the aggressiveness of Jonathan Pierce was going to be his downfall because of Mirakani's chokes that he's very famous for. But I don't know what it was. I don't know if Mirakani had an off day or if Jonathan Pierce was just that good on Saturday. But nonetheless, Jonathan Pierce was able to get some big strikes on the ground. He ended up getting the TKO victory due to ground and pound. So that was a big win for him. And that led to an absolutely amazing performance by Nathaniel Wood over Charles Rosa. I mean, it was almost perfect what Nathaniel Wood. If you told me that a man that took 2 years off, who has not fought in 2 years, I would have had that performance, I would have said you were absolutely crazy. His striking was precise. He had absolutely nasty leg kicks that were, at the end of the fight, was really dropping Charles Rosa every single time he landed those kicks. So that was just, I mean, I'm very excited to see where Nathaniel Wood goes with his career, because he has insanely high potential with what we saw against Charles Rosa in that fight. Grappling, striking, he really has it all too. So I'm very excited to see where Nathaniel Wood goes with his career. That leads to Mark Diakese versus Damir Hadzovic. Another one-sided affair between these two. Diakese's grappling was just too much for Hadzovic. He was 8 for 11 on takedowns. He landed 70% of the strikes he threw. It was just an overall basically dominant performance by Mark Diakese in this matchup. There's really nothing more to say about the fight. And that leads to the premier prelim, Mason Jones versus Ludovic Klein. This was a very, very fun matchup, considering Klein was one of 2 underdogs to actually win on this card. And he was actually a pretty big underdog according to Vegas at a plus 320 heading into the fight. But also the fight itself was entertaining, with both guys throwing big shots. Klein was able to get a knockdown. I believe that was in the second round. Also in the second round, he threw some like crazy jumping kick that you see in like karate movies. That was pretty nuts. And he landed it clean too. That was the most impressive part. Is he got a clean head kick with that one. Mason Jones actually outstruck Klein by a slim margin, but Klein did land the more significant strikes, and in the end, that was what got him the decision upset victory over Mason Jones. And then the first main card fight, Paul Craig versus Volkan Ozdemir. Paul Craig typically is one of the most entertaining fighters in the UFC, but he didn't seem to have the answer for Volkan Ozdemir. He attempted 15 takedowns in this fight. He didn't land a single one of those takedowns. He kept trying to pull guard, and it was just not working out at all for him. He still was continuing to do so in the third round when he was already down 2 rounds to none. At that point, I think you got to just go. You can't really just accept positions and hope for the best. Ozdemir, on the other hand, did basically everything he wanted to in this fight. He did everything he needed to do. He didn't go to the ground with Paul Craig, and he just landed the strikes that he wanted to. It was really a vintage showing for Volkan Ozdemir, but really good on him to avoid going to the ground as much as he did, because not a lot of people can say that they didn't get taken down by Paul Craig, especially when he throws 15 takedowns at you. And now, Molly Mccann versus Hannah Goldie. Signature performance by Molly Mccann once again. She looked great, just as usual, offensively and defensively. Defensively, Goldie only landed 9 of the 33 strikes she threw. Mccann stuffed all 5 takedowns that Hannah Goldie attempted. Then offensively, Mccann just has so much power, landing that right hand, then following it up with another spinning back elbow, as we know at the first UFC London card when she landed that brutal spinning back elbow that knocked out her opponent out cold. This one didn't knock Goldie out cold, but then afterwards she did land a flurry of strikes and was still able to get the finish, getting the TKO victory and a performance bonus, so a little bit of extra cash in her pocket to go along with it. Next up, a fight that was tough to watch. Nikita Krylov versus Alexander Gustafson. As good of a performance as Krylov had in this very short bout, it was only just over a minute. I think the bigger story is just almost how upsetting it is to see Alexander Gustafson, who former title challenger, the guy who has come the absolute closest to defeating John Jones in the octagon, to just have that poor of a performance. It just shows age does catch up with you eventually, but nonetheless, you do have to give credit to Krylov for having that performance. He is coming off of a loss to Paul Craig a few months ago, so good on him to get back on the winning side of things with a KO victory. And then the biggest crowd reaction of the night, arguably the biggest fight of the night, Paddy Pimblet submits Jordan Levitt. I did not think I would be saying those words. I have to say that was not the performance I expected from Paddy at all. I thought Paddy was going to try to keep this fight on the feet. I thought that was the smart thing to do. Jordan Levitt is a great grappler, great jiu-jitsu artist. But Paddy looked great on the ground. He was able to get back up multiple times, stuff takedowns multiple times, landed his own takedown that led to his submission victory. Absolutely signature, amazing performance by Paddy Pimblet. He had the whole crowd behind him, as we know, out in London where he's located. So that was really cool to see the crowd. I love his walkouts, just getting into it with the crowd. And then right as he walks in the octagon, the switch just flips and he's all business. And he got the job done in this fight, once again improving to 3-0 in the UFC. And then the co-main event of the evening, Jack Hermanson versus Chris Curtis. I'm really glad I wait 2 days before I do this show, because after that fight ended, along with everyone else, I was very upset with how Chris Curtis acted after that fight. And during that fight, I mean, he was flipping off Jack Hermanson. He was just being a poor sport almost. Since then, though, Chris Curtis has apologized to Jack Hermanson. He even got a picture with him, publicly apologized, and said he realized how wrong he was. So I'm not going to go too hard on him. But Jack Hermanson came into this fight and almost had a perfect game plan. The grappling wasn't working. That is Jack Hermanson's bread and butter. He transitioned to this long-range striking attack as he had a huge reach advantage over Chris Curtis, and it worked the whole time. He kept moving. He stayed out of the boxing range of Chris Curtis. As we know, that's really where Chris Curtis makes his money, is his boxing. But I think this is also a great learning experience for Chris Curtis. One, not everybody's going to stand in front of you and let you punch them in the face. There's people that have great movement. I think if Chris Curtis can add leg kicks into his game, I think that would be astronomically huge for Chris Curtis, just to limit the mobility. You start getting those leg kicks, guys don't move as fast. I think he attempted maybe one leg kick and he didn't land it. So, I mean, if you could add that to your game, stop Jack Hermanson from moving around so much, because he stuffed every single takedown Jack Hermanson sent to him. And Jack Hermanson, again, is a great grappler. So he has the takedown defense, but he definitely struggled with the movement of Jack Hermanson. I would like to see him add a little bit more to his game, but I think Chris Curtis will bounce back and he'll be okay. And that leads to our unfortunate main event, Curtis Blaydes versus Tom Aspinall. Another unfortunate ending to a huge fight, back-to-back weeks. The third one we've had this year where a main event ended due to injury. Alexander Rakic versus Jan Blachowicz. Rakic's knee blew out. Last week we had Brian Ortega's shoulder get dislocated, where he wasn't able to go on, and now in this one it looks like Tom Aspinall blew his knee out. So it's unfortunate. Unfortunately, there's really nothing you can do about it either. It really sucks to see Tom Aspinall, who I've been on record, and I'll say it again, he is a future heavyweight champion, so hopefully he can get back. Hopefully he can get better after this. Another reason it does suck, though, is Curtis Blaydes really could have used a convincing win over a guy like Tom Aspinall. I know it counts as a win for him, but, I mean, are you really going to... It was, a minute into the fight, and it was an injury. It was a freak accident. So hopefully Curtis Blaydes doesn't get too highly affected by this. I could still see him being an interim title bout between between the winner of Cyril Gane and Tai Tuivasa coming up in September. So hopefully he still gets that shot if it is presented to him. But nonetheless, still an unfortunate, very unfortunate ending to the London card with Tom Aspinall getting hurt. And then next up, we have Gian Kim versus Jocelyn Edwards, a very intriguing matchup in the women's bantamweight division. Edwards did take this fight on short notice, and she fought about 6 or 7 weeks ago at UFC 275 against Ramona Pascal, but she didn't take a whole lot of damage in that fight, so I'm not too entirely surprised that she was available for this fight. This is a very big fight for Gian Kim, though. She has lost her last 3 fights, so this could be a fight to stay in the UFC. So I think the confidence is gone for her, though. I got to go with Jocelyn Edwards, even though it is on short notice. I think she has the confidence. I'm going to Jocelyn Edwards by decision. Then that leads to the undefeated Michael Morales taking on Adam Fugit, who will be making his UFC debut. Also a UFC debut on short notice, as Ramiz Brahimaj had to pull out of this fight. Both guys are fantastic grapplers. Michael Morales does only have 1 win by submission, so he is much more of a wrestler, ground and pound type guy, where Fugit does a lot of jiu-jitsu. He has a full arsenal of jiu-jitsu with Kimuras in his, on his record. He has rear naked chokes. He has, I believe, a heel hook too, so he can really submit you in any way. But Michael Morales does have the advantage, though. Like I said, Fugit is making his UFC debut, and it's on short notice. I'm going Morales, and I'm going with the first finish of the night being this fight with a second-round TKO. Then we have Drakkar Klose versus Rafa Garcia. Drakkar Klose looking to stay active, coming off of his last win back in April after his 2-year layoff, where Rafa Garcia will be taking this fight on short notice also, but he actually took this fight quite a while ago, so it's not entirely too short notice, but he's taking the place of Diego Ferreira, but has really turned his UFC career around. After he dropped his first 2 UFC bouts, he has since won his last 2 over Natan Levy and Jesse Ronson. Drakkar Klose is definitely an all-around fighter, so he is very comfortable on the ground, including wins versus Christos Gallegos and Mark Diakese, 2 excellent grapplers, 2 different grapplers to go along with that, which will be good considering Rafa Garcia is a very talented grappler, with half of his pro wins coming by submission. I am actually going to go with the short notice fighter in this fight one, though. I'm going Rafa Garcia, and I think he actually gets the finish too. I'm going 3rd round submission for Rafa Garcia. Next up, Dante Mays, and then he's facing off against Hamdi Abdelwahab. I don't know if that's right. I couldn't find anywhere to actually say his name, so I do apologize if I absolutely butchered that name. But two hard-hitting heavyweights in this match. Another guy who will be stepping in on short notice in terms of Hamdi. Both guys are generally more stand-up guys. Dante Mays does have a bit of a ground game if he needs to use it. Plus, Dante Mays is just far more experienced. I'm going to go with him in this fight, and I think it's going to be a short fight. I'm going first round KO for Dante Mays. And then for the fight I am honestly most excited for, Drew Dober versus Rafael Alves. Out of all the prelim fights, this is the one I am most excited for. Drew Dober is coming off one of the craziest one-round fights we've ever seen in his win over Terrence McKinney earlier this year. He's absolutely just tough as nails. He got knocked down multiple times in that first round and then was able to come back and finish Terrence McKinney in that same round. Rafael Alves has had a pretty tough two fights since joining the UFC, with a loss to Damir Ismagulov in his debut. And then in his first win in the UFC, he got that over Mark Diakase. Alves is definitely seen as the much better grappler in this fight, but Dober can hold his own on the ground. And like I said, he's just absolutely tough as nails. I got to go with Drew Dober in this fight just based off toughness. I think Drew Dober can finish Rafael Alves. I don't think Alves can finish Drew Dober. I'm going Drew Dober second round TKO. And then the premier prelim of the night, Alex Morono versus Matthew Semmelsberger. A great matchup to finish off the prelims between two well-rounded fighters. Both guys have had great success as of recent, winning 4 of their last 5 fights. Morono is the far more experienced fighter. He brings a lot of patience, a lot of technique in his striking, where Semmelsberger does have some technique, but he's more of a power puncher. He can take you out with one shot. We've seen him have a 15-second knockout, so he definitely brings the more power to this situation. But I do like Alex Morono's experience. I like his patience. I like his technical abilities. I think it goes the distance. I'm going Alex Morono by decision. And then kicking off the main card, Magomed Ankalaev taking on Anthony Smith, 2 top 5 light heavyweights. I've been excited for this fight since it was announced. Magomed, who very easily could be 18-0 right now if he didn't get submitted at the very last second by Paul Craig. This was a few years back, though. Since then, Magomed has gone on an 8-fight win streak, including wins over names like Thiago Santos in his last fight, Volkan Ozdemir before that, Nikita Krylov before that, and then Ian Kutalaba 2 times before that. Anthony Smith will be Magomed's toughest test to date, though. He has really turned his career back in the right direction, Anthony Smith has. I believe in 2018 to 2019, he lost 3 of 4 to John Jones, Glover Teixeira, and Alexander Rakic. But he has since won his last 3 bouts over Devin Clark, Jimmy Crute, and Ryan Spann. Smith is also a very well-rounded fighter, but I mean, he's more of a striker just like Magomed is. Both guys can go to the ground if needed, but are primarily strikers. This is a big fight for both guys, but I got to go with Magomed in this fight. Just for the recent competition, I think he's on a roll. I think he's on a rise to the top of this division. So I'm saying Magomed Ankalaev by decision. Then we have a huge matchup in the flyweight division between 2 top 6 contenders, Alexander Pantoja and Alex Perez. Alex Perez has just had horrible luck as of late. He challenged Deiveson Figueiredo for the title back in 2020, and since then has had 6 straight fights canceled, some by him, some by his opponents, but he can still be very dangerous. He is a former title contender, but I won't lie and say that a 2-year layoff is nothing to be okay with. It still can't affect him. Alexander Pantoja has been near the top of this division for a very long time, but just has not had the best of luck in terms of contending for a title, because most of the time that he's been near the top, Brandon Moreno and Deiveson Figueiredo have been going back and forth in their trilogy. And now you have Kai Kara-France, who has exploded onto the scene and become the number 2 contender. Alexander Pantoja does have insanely big wins in his career, though. Wins over Brandon Royval, Matt Schnell. He's beat Brandon Moreno twice, one on the Ultimate Fighter. He also beat Kai Kara-France on that same Ultimate Fighter season. So, I mean, he does have the wins on his resume, and I do think the lack of fights in the last 2 years for Alex Perez is going to be a big factor in this fight. I got to go with Alexander Pantoja in this fight, and I'm going him by submission. And now we go all the way up from the flyweights to the heavyweights. Derek Lewis taking on Sergey Pavlovich. This is going to be a huge fight for both of these guys. Derek Lewis, who is kind of, I don't want to say holding on by a string with his contender status, but he has lost as of recently a little bit too much. And I know he's one of the most exciting fighters in UFC history. Brutal KOs, huge fights up and down his resume. But he is kind of fighting to stay in that contender status. Sergey Pavlovich, who was one of the biggest up-and-coming stars in this division, before he was unable to fight for 2.5 years, due to travel issues with COVID and everything, the pandemic. He had a couple fights get canceled. I believe he was injured before that too. So he just hasn't had the best of luck. But he had a 2.5-year layoff and then came back and destroyed Shamil Abdurrahimov. So, I mean, he picked up right back where he was. I think a win for Pavlovich would absolutely shoot him up in the rankings, and I honestly think he does it. I'm going Sergey Pavlovich by second round KO. And then we go back down to the flyweights for our first of 2 title fights. Brandon Moreno taking on Kai Kara-France for the interim flyweight championship. Moreno, being the former champ, had the great first fight with Deiveson Figueiredo that ended in a draw, where Brandon Moreno took that fight on short notice, and then he came back in the second fight, won the title back, and then had a very, very close fight in the trilogy with Deiveson Figueiredo, which he, unfortunately for him, he did lose. And then you have him taking on Kai Kara-France, who has been on an absolute tear through this division. Kai Kara-France coming off the biggest win of his career versus Askar Askarov, where it was really a comeback win too. In the first round, he got taken down. He got controlled for most of the round. And then after that, he didn't get taken down once. He stuffed every takedown. He had tremendous striking, which is going to be very big because Brandon Moreno is very good at grappling. He's without a doubt going to try to get this fight on the ground. I think this is a really close fight. It's a very tough fight to call, but I'm going with the upset here. I'm saying Kai Kara-France wins the interim title by decision. Later on, he will then take on the champion Deiveson Figueiredo, but I think it's going to be kind of a changing a little bit. I don't think there's going to be a fourth fight, at least for now, between Brandon Moreno and Deiveson Figueiredo. I'm going Kai Kara-France getting the title, the interim title, that is. And then we have our main event of the evening, Juliana Pena, Amanda Nunes in their highly anticipated rematch. Amanda Nunes, the GOAT women's fighter. Juliana Pena, we know the history between these two. Early 2021, Juliana Pena came on a podcast and said she was the worst stylistic matchup for Amanda Nunes. She would go in there and she would mop the floor with Amanda Nunes. And we all laughed at her. I said I was the same way. I sat there and was like, you're out of your mind if you think you're going to wipe the floor with Amanda Nunes. And she did exactly that. She looked absolutely flawless in their first fight. Now, I will say, I don't think Amanda Nunes prepared for Juliana Pena that well. I think she thought like all of us, where she's the GOAT. She bulldozed everyone in her way. And Juliana Pena thinks she's going to come in, and Juliana did it. I think she's going to be better prepared for this fight. But I agree with Juliana Pena. I think she's a stylistic nightmare for Amanda Nunes. And for that, I think this rivalry ends on Saturday. Juliana Pena wins over Amanda Nunes for a second time, ending that rivalry. There's nothing more to talk about with that one. But that is all I have for you today. Thank you all so much for listening. I can't wait for next week's show where we react to UFC 277. It's going to be very fun. I will also be giving my predictions for UFC Fight Night. Thiago Santos versus Jamal Hill. That is the headliner. We also have both of the Ultimate Fighter finale fights between the heavyweights and the women's flyweights, so that will be very exciting also. But until then, you can find me on Instagram at Monday Night Fight Talk. You can find me on Twitter at MN Fight Talk. Check out my most recent post on both, where you get to see me with Terrence McKinney. Again, that was pretty cool at Bellator. So tune in for that. You can also find me every Tuesday for now on Squabo Says' YouTube channel, talking more general sports, NFL, NBA, MLB. So tune in to that also. But thank you all for listening. You can find me next week, same time, same place, Monday nights, 5 p.m. Pacific time for Monday Night Fight Talk.